Hey everyone, Todd here, internalarchitect.com. And in this video, I'm going to tell my story. And so on November 9th, 2009, I was sitting on the courthouse steps and I was in the process of trying to figure out what I wanted to do for kind of the next stage of my life. We're deep during this time. We were deep in the heart of recession going on, and the reason why I was at the courthouse steps is I was there to get a little bit more insight into property sales because of all the foreclosures that were going on. They literally sell houses on the courthouse steps, and it's really kind of a sad deal. But on this day, it was a gorgeous, late fall day, and I was sitting there, and I was just kind of listening to everything, and that's when I started feeling like a cramp in my right side, and I was just like, just really uncomfortable, just kind of not really feeling like, this is just weird. This is really uncomfortable. I don't really know what's going on. And I don't know. This is, kind of first thing in the morning, about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And as the auction was going on, it was just kind of staying there and lingering. It was just annoying. And just kind of worked through it through the day, and I honestly felt it was gas, and just like I hadn't really pooped that morning or anything, so it was just kind of like just whatever. And over the course of the day, just kind of stayed there and lingered around, and I was just kind of really uncomfortable for most of the day. And I actually ended up bringing this up to my parents later in the afternoon. I was like, I just got this weird like side thing going on, and it's just really uncomfortable, and I don't know what's going on, but it this isn't normal. So I was like, okay, we ended up having the discussion that if it persisted the next day, then we should go to the doctor and start figuring it out. So that night, just kind of dealt with it and kind of carried on, and the next went to bed. Next morning, got up, got going, and it came back. The pain in my right side, just right below my lowest part of my rib cage, and then I was like, okay, this is weird. Let's just go to the doctor. I don't know what's going on. So I had started earlier in the year, kind of doing some blood tests and whatever, because I was just kind of feeling some weird things weren't totally right. And in hindsight, it made a lot of sense why I started doing that. And ended up going to my primary physician and getting my latest lab results, and grabbed those with me and went down to the emergency room. And from there, ended up getting admitted, and ended up got a CAT scan done, and things started kind of happening at that point. The internist on call started kind of figuring out what was going on, and the CAT scan came back, and it looked, the primary area that he was looking at was my liver. And what my liver looked like in the CT scan was if you were to take just like a bag of birdseed. That was kind of the consistency of it. It wasn't like a pure, clear image. It just looked really odd, and it didn't look right. And had the conversation with the internist, and he was like, okay, there's definitely something going on. Not sure what it is. It's one of two things. One, it's either an infection, or two, it's cancer of some sort. And I was like, it's definitely an infection. It's not cancer. I'm whatever. And he still recommended that we get admitted down into St. Anthony Central in Denver and start kind of figuring out what was going on. And if it was an infection, then I'd have to be on some pretty serious antibiotics for X amount of time, and if it was cancer, well, there's a whole other story. So that night, or that late evening, about 8 o'clock. We ended up getting a room sorted out for me to go down to St. Anthony Central, and I remember getting admitted in and getting into a room, and I had to share a room originally with this guy that just he sounded like he was on his deathbed. He was just like the worst deep cough you could imagine, just aches and pains and just the whole 9 yards. And later I ended up getting moved into my own room and whatever, and from there things started to progress. Ended up doing another CT scan, and then the next day got scheduled in to do a liver biopsy, and I also had a lymph node in my right arm that I didn't even notice that was inflamed and swollen, and I ended up the following day ended up having that removed also. So in the course of about a 5-day span, I ended up getting admitted into the hospital. I had a liver biopsy, which was done without anesthetic, because in order to get a good, clear sample, they literally have to stab you and take samples, and that was undescribable. And then the following day is when they removed the lymph node in my armpit, and all these biopsies just started happening immediately. And on day 5 is when the on-call oncologist came in, Dr. Robert Cantor, and broke the news that I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and a pretty advanced version of it. Stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now from that point is when it got really, really heavy. That's when like everything kind of happened, where everything that I was, my feelings, my emotions were like, oh my God, I have cancer. And that's when the heaviness of it all happened. And at that moment, we needed to take a little time, so Dr. Cantor left the office, or left the room for a minute, and we just at that point, my family was there. My mom and dad and my aunt and uncle were there, and they experienced the news at the same time, and we ended up kind of all processing this together for a little bit. And then after a little bit, Dr. Cantor came back in, and we started discussing kind of treatment and kind of the next process. And at that point, I started kind of seeing Dr. Cantor as a patient at his office, and ended up starting kind of going through chemotherapy less than 10 days later from the initial diagnosis. Over the course of about 6 months, I ended up doing 12 rounds of chemotherapy called ABVD. And you can look that acronym up on Google, and it'll bring it all up. It's bleomycin, VO, I can't tell you all of them off the top of my head, but ABVD was the treatment regimen for 12 rounds, and each one was done. I didn't have a port put in. I actually ended up doing all mine through my veins and through on both arms, and each round was approximately 3 hours. And I didn't burn up any veins, surprisingly, through that whole deal. But once I was diagnosed, I had kind of an outpouring of support and reach out to me in every aspect, from snowboarding to family to friends, and there was it was an absolute amazing support group that really came together for me, and I am so humbled and lucky to have met so many great and willing people over the course of my life, that they really all pulled together. The whole entire community, the Breckenridge community, came together. Even all the firefighters and first responders all really supported me in all that, which was fabulous, And yeah, and back to the treatment side of it. So I would go into Dr. Cantor's office, and I would get hooked up I would sit in an awesome little lazy boy chair, and they'd just hook me up into an IV just right in my arm, and I went through all the different veins of my arm, and ended up starting to do this course of treatment. And backtrack real quick. Before I started treatment, I ended up having my first PET scan, PET scan, and that kind of gave us an idea of exactly where the cancer was at and how much it had spread at this point. The original lymph node was just above my heart, right about in here, and that was kind of where it all started to spread from. But it went into many different lymph nodes, up into my neck and into my armpit, obviously the one that was removed, and into my groin and whatever, and it moved into my liver, which, if you're going to have a cancer move somewhere, you want to have it go to your liver, because at least it's the fastest regenerating organ in your body. So over the next 6 months, I went through the 12 rounds of this ABVD chemotherapy, and at month 3, I ended up doing a PET scan, and that came back showing a huge reduction in everything in the entire cancer, and everything that was happening with the lymphoma inside my body. And at month 6, I ended up doing another one shortly after my last round of chemotherapy, and it was probably the end of April-ish in 2010, and we ended up waiting about a month or so, and I ended up doing, at this point, it would have been my 4th PET scan, and we did that. And at this point, I've already learned a lot about PET scans and what they do and how they work, and for those of you that don't know, a PET scan uses this radioactive isotope that they inject into your body, and it goes through, and it is combined with a glucose solution that, for whatever reason, cancer really connects to it, right? And it feeds off of this, and so that's how the scanning machine is able to determine how far the cancer is, and determine a lot of different aspects of it. So after this 4th scan, I was able to go into the imaging room and ask the technician if I could just see the image, and at that point she pulled it up, and I could see a spot right there above my heart that hadn't gone away. And I didn't say anything to anyone about it, but it definitely was a bit of a letdown. It brought back fear into, it's like, wow, okay, this is coming back, but I don't know this for sure. I'm not the professional. I don't know if this is what this means. So a couple days passed, and ended up getting a call from Dr. Cantor, and sure enough, there was a reoccurrence happening within my body with the Hodgkin's. And at that point, it was determined that I need to probably go through a stem cell transplant, and in order to do that, we need to get my body back into remission. And that's when kind of the discussion started happening with a gentleman called named Dr. Mark Brunvand. And it turns out he is a very well respected transplant doctor and a very successful one at that. And on top of it, it turns out that he actually knew some of my family friends from the Summit County area. And it turns out that his family had roots in the Frisco area and were business owners and entrepreneurs in the area, and it afforded him to go to medical school and go get his degree in oncology and do all that, which was really, really cool. And it just so happened that he knew family and stuff like that. It was absolutely huge in helping me feel like there was someone in my corner. This was just a really crazy period of time because, you're dealing with so many emotions, and on top of it, your mortality is really kicking into high gear. And, with the onset of a reoccurrence happening, it was already real, but two, it just put icing on the cake of how scary the situation was for me and my family. And so at this point, things kind of, a lot of good communication was going on with my family. And, I had been dating my current wife, Erica, at the time, and really getting involved with her family and her daughters. And they were really instrumental in keeping me grounded and keeping me looking forward to something outside of cancer, outside of snowboarding, outside of everything else that was going on. And at this point, I was going to have to get my body back into remission. The only way that I was going to be able to do that is do some more chemotherapy rounds that were a little bit more aggressive. And that was just to prepare myself for the stem cell transplant. And it was decided at that point, with the conversations with Dr. Brunvand and Dr. Canner, that an autologous stem cell transplant was going to be the way to go for me, mostly because of the type of Hodgkin's I had been very successful in the past for treating similar cases, and had a really good track record at that point. The next rounds of chemotherapy to get my body back in remission were 2 rounds of ICE chemotherapy, and those had to be done in the hospital, and they were administered over a 3-day period, and I had to do 2 of them. I ended up doing both of these at Lutheran Hospital in Denver, and during this time, during one of the treatments, a fundraiser was put together for me by some old family friends that did this concert. Both of them are incredibly talented musicians, vocally and classically also, and they did this deal at the high school, which I was able to watch through Skype at the time on my laptop, and I was able to kind of go both ways, and everyone at the concert was able to see me, and I was able to kind of communicate and talk to everyone briefly before the concert. And that was really a cool thing that happened. And all this was happening while I was hooked up to IVs and going through treatment, right? And over the course of these 2 treatments, I ended up really having a hard time with the after effects of chemotherapy. The one thing that didn't happen to me is I didn't really get very nauseous through the whole thing, and a lot of that might have had to do with medical marijuana at the time. I was smoking a lot of marijuana to help keep the nausea down and keep me eating, and that I will say this now. I am a huge proponent of medical marijuana, and I believe deeply in its positive effects, but also with the broad spectrum of different ailments and different diseases that are out there. So absolutely, medical marijuana was instrumental in my process through getting to my first day of remission. So I went through 2 rounds of the ice chemotherapy. Each one was 3 days in length, and during or just after the second one is when I started all the Neupogen shots to start the process of getting ready to harvest my own stem cells. During this time, I had or just before all the ice treatments, I ended up having a PICC line put in my arm right there. And that was given just so I could have the chemotherapy administered over the extra long courses of the day. During that time, I had all of my tests done through that, and in hindsight, I kind of wish I would have had a port done just to not have to be stuck so many times with all the chemotherapy that I ended up going through and having put in my body, all the blood tests that had to be done, all the shots, you name it, everything that had to go into a vein. I've been there, done that. I'm not afraid of needles anymore. That is for sure. So after both rounds of chemotherapy, I was getting ready to do the harvesting, and I ended up this happened just about a week before I was administered into Presbyterian St. Luke in the process to do the stem cell transplant. During that whole there's so many pieces and parts. During that period of time, I ended up going through more physical tests than I have ever done in my life, from breathing tests to physical tests to strength tests to mental tests, psychological. It was a huge amount of testing that had to be done in order just to make sure that I was okay to go through this process. And fortunately, all that went really, really well. Once I ended up getting through all that, all the Neupogen shots, everything was ready to go. I went into Presbyterian St. Luke and did the stem cell harvest. And what that entailed was getting hooked up, or actually just before that, I ended up having a Hickman catheter put in my chest. And that was a 3-lumen port that went up into my neck and then down just above my heart, and they were able to do the rest of the administering there. They pulled the PICC line out, they put this one in. I was pretty much ready to go for the entire rest of the process. During this time, all these shots were happening, stem cell building shots, white blood cell platelet building shots were being given to me with the shot name of Neupogen, and also I was taking Neulasta shots also to keep my immune system up and going. And it built enough in me that when I went in to do the stem cell harvesting, which is where they hooked me up to a centrifuge, and I remember watching my blood come out of my chest, going up, going into this whole machine, through this whole thing, up and around and down, and then whatever, and then back in. And I was there for 5 hours, hooked up to the machine and just reading magazines and just really just taking it easy, as just there wasn't anything else to do. And the doctors told me that in order to do the transplant, at a minimum, we needed to have 2 million stem cells harvested. And my doctor wanted to have, I think, 4 or 5 million stem cells to do the test, or to do the stem cell transplant. And over the course of 5 hours, I harvested 9.4 million stem cells. Now, how they get that number, I don't really know, but that's how many I approximately harvested, and ended up doing a couple other tests, bone marrow biopsy test. Just there. It was for a period of about 3 months. Was just a lot of tests, a lot of chemotherapy, a lot of more tests, more PET scans. I did my 5th PET scan just before I was entered into Presbyterian St. Luke for the next step of the entire process. And at that point, it was my body was back in remission. Things were looking good. I had all the stem cells we needed to do the transplant, and then D-Day came, and I remember it very vividly. It was September 27th, the day before. Erica, the girls, and myself went on a picnic up onto Boreas Pass during all the colors. Fall colors were absolutely just off the chart, and I have a really, really, really good photo of that day that I just happen to cherish all the time, and enjoyed that day. The next day went down, and became the boy in the bubble in the transplant unit of Presbyterian St. Luke. And where that was at was a second floor in Presbyterian, and there's just another 4 or 5 people going through it during that time. And at that point, I was in a pressurized room, and I was given to start out with a 6-day round of chemotherapy called BEAM. And this chemotherapy was designed to, how I say, nuke my immune system and turn my immune system into absolute zero. And that was the only way that we were going to be able to kill the lymphoma and the cause of the lymphoma. And after about 2 days after the chemotherapy, the transplant happened, and it was really anticlimactic. Ended up taking they cryogenically froze all my stem cells afterwards, so it didn't destroy them. And then they took all these stem cells and they sucked them out with a syringe, and they had this 3-way valve thing that went into my Hickman catheter, and they just shot them into me. And over the course of the next month was the stem cells working their way back into my bone marrow, and starting to create and produce new stem cells, new platelets, new red blood cells, and new white blood cells. So this was a bit of a roller coaster wave over time, because every day I would get a test, and it would see my, for a little bit my blood levels were level. There was nothing for about the first week, and then after the first week they started creeping up. And then the next day they got up a little bit, then they would dive down, and then they up and up and up and dive down. And over the course of the next month, my body got back to a point to where it was had created a brand new immune system. Literally a brand new immune system. I mean, it's fascinating in how that all worked and how that all came together. And then after about a month, I was able to go to a halfway house close to Presbyterian there, and leave and not be the boy in the bubble anymore, and was able to get out and do a little bit of walking outside. And I remember the day I got outside, and I remember it very vividly. I could hear all the different, I'd kind of missed fall, so I missed all the colors in Denver. And when I went in, everything was green. When I came out, all the leaves had fallen, everything was dead, and whatever. And this was end of October and of 2010, and I was still I remember going outside and I remember just hearing everything, like hearing hearing the wind blow in the trees, even though there weren't any leaves. I could still hear it. The smell, um, the cars, the sirens. This is big city Denver, and I could hear all this stuff and was just blown away by just all the little senses that you might take for granted because you're just so used to it, right? And the smells, the sights, just my senses were an overload, and got into the halfway house called Brent's Place, which they do amazing work in Denver, and absolutely just great folks down there. And over the course of 2 weeks, I spent my time between Brent's Place and even coming up to the house in Breckenridge a little bit, back and forth, just to kind of start acclimating a little bit and getting out of everything, and getting used to kind of some normal life again. And it took a while, and at this point I've been in remission. They say day 0 is the day of transplant, and then everything from there is +1, +2, +3, +4, +5. And at this point, I'm going on 8 years this September, and I am so thankful and looking forward to that date, because it's a huge milestone for me every single year that I'm able to get to that and feel as good as I do right now. Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot of pieces and parts in between all the people that visited me in Presbyterian St. Luke, and all my supporters along the way, and just everyone that was able to be involved through this process. I cannot thank them enough, and I cannot thank you who just listened to my entire story, that took the time out of the day to really listen. That there's someone on your side that knows what you went through, and that understands it at a pretty deep level also, and is sitting here able to talk to you about this, and to move forward, and to help you into your next part of your journey, into your next life. I've been really fortunate that I have found really good positive energy in my life, and I'm at a point with everything that I've done that I feel very peaceful, and I feel very happy with where things are at. And as long as I continue to keep pushing forward and keep helping you push forward also, that's it, man. That's what it's all about. And thank you again. I really, 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 really appreciate your time. And yeah, hit me in the comment section below, and if you have any questions, by all means, and hit subscribe too if you like this channel. So again, thank you, and I will be talking to you on the next video.